Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris and welcome to another LEGO Star Wars MOC review video, where it is my goal to review every single one of the custom LEGO Star Wars builds which are currently available from Brickvault.com, which is a fantastic website where MOCists can actually sell the instructions to some of the most detailed and advanced LEGO models out there. Now you can see quite a few of them hung up above me here, and we've already gone through a lot of reviews of spaceships like the TIE Fighters, as well as just some other stuff here like the police gunship and stuff like that. But today we're going to be focusing on something a little bit different. This you can see right here is the Separatist Supertank. It was a vehicle that debuted in really only one episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars and was promptly defeated on Geonosis, but it was a very interesting concept that harkened back to the original MTTs, which, if we come down here, you can actually see the original LEGO Star Wars MTT sets on display right here, the 2006 one or 7, and then the more recent 2015 one. But this is something completely different, and as you can see, the building techniques, color scheme, and overall shaping of the model is very, very unique, complete with a floating docking bay, as well as different types of guns that you can angle up and down. So there are a lot of really cool things to see here, and I am incredibly excited to bring the review to all of you, and so let's just jump right into it and get started. Building this model was a monumental task made only even harder because I was building 4 different Star Wars MOCs at the same time. But thankfully the instructions were really clearly laid out and really felt like official LEGO instructions, and that's, I think, the perfect way to start this off. Alright, so here we have the Separatist Supertank. This is a massive model, and the price tag does reflect that. It cost me nearly $200 to get all the pieces to replicate this off of Bricklink, although given the complexity and the amount of detail the model like this provides, I honestly feel like the price isn't actually that outrageous, especially because you're approaching these models with a very different philosophy than most other LEGO sets, which typically are focused on stability for kids to play with, and also the build experience, as well as being able to play with it and move it around, whereas this is purely a display model, despite having a few functions, which is a little bit odd, and we're going to talk about that later in the review, because this model seems a little bit confused in terms of what it wants to be. It is purely a display model if we're talking about how fragile this is and how hard it is to move around, which I will explain. However, there's a lot of interesting play features actually built into the model itself, which on their own would be very nice, but built into it because of how fragile it is, it makes operating and even accessing these play features almost more trouble than it's worth. And let me explain why. So before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about how I'm going to structure this review. I want to put a lot of focus on the building techniques of the model, and specifically all the functions, how is it playable, or what parts of it are going to fall off, and also talk about the building experience, aka how good were the instructions, was it well set up, did it feel like I was building an official LEGO set, and so on, and finally talking about the overall aesthetics and how it relates to the official model as seen in the TV show. So starting off, the first thing I do want to emphasize here is that this is very, very fragile. I am almost afraid to touch it because the entire front part, which I will explain and maybe we'll even see it later in the video, is really only attached by 2 studs, or maybe 4 studs tops. So do you see this entire piece here? This whole thing is really just held on, if I can very carefully lift it up, on a very, very tenuous connection, which are these studs right here. So it's just really being attached based on these couple of studs here. Okay, so it's a little more than 2, but basically this bar is the only thing attaching the entire front of the model, which makes it very, very easy for it to fall off. But that is not the only major thing here, because the front here is also only attached by 4 studs. This entire movable front component here is attached by 4 studs, so if you accidentally brush it with your hand or knock it off, it is literally nearly impossible to put it on. I have had to do this many, many times just while carrying the model around, and every time if this came off, you have to take off the entire bottom section, very carefully put it back on, and set it up like that. The same goes for these 2 panels. They're held on by bionicle ball joints, and those ball joints in turn are held on by 4 studs, so they're also very easy to break off. Now that being said, not everything about the model is bad. It's actually really cool how you can actually angle the different guns on the sides here. This is fully rotatable, it just has an axle going through the entire model, so you can really position these and angle the guns the way you want. And most importantly, it does replicate the play function as seen in the Clone Wars episode itself, where the gun is revealed by this front of the tank actually moving backwards. But this is where we get into some of the problems of the model. You see, the way this is built, there isn't enough clearance for the top part to actually clear the guns. So the model starts off like this, and you want to reveal the main gun, you rotate it up, and boom, a piece will fall off just because of the way the build is set up. And I did check the instruction manuals, this is built correctly. This lip here will basically always catch on the front gun or something related to the front gun every single time. So it's very frustrating to actually be able to operate this, because every time you want to show off the play feature, this will catch on the gun. And you can literally see as I push it in, it's getting pushed up. This brick here is getting pushed up as we push it over the gun, which basically destabilizes the entire model. This whole thing is really only held on by a few bricks anyway, so it's very easy for this to pop off. And then there's almost no way to actually open it without bricks falling off. So obviously the play feature is there, but it's not really one that is very sustainable. And it's kind of a shame, because I feel like there are a lot of ways that this could have been mitigated. As you can see, bits and pieces are already falling off here because this whole assembly is also only attached by the one axle, so this is also very, very easy to come apart, and once it comes apart, this is a pain to put back on. Of course, other pieces are falling off as I put it on, so again, as you can see, this is absolutely just a display model and not a play model, despite having some bizarre play features that honestly I probably wouldn't find if they just left them off and made this a still statue instead, because no one's really going to be playing with this. Still, that being said, when you do get it working, it is very satisfying to rotate the gun up and down. Unfortunately, as you can see here, none of this is actually attached, so this entire build just kind of sits here. I believe it's attached on a couple studs in the back, so you really just have to hope it doesn't fall off. Obviously, as you can see, lots and lots of issues and minor quibbles that I have with the way this is built in terms of being a model itself, but it certainly looks very good, and the looks is honestly all that matters to an extent, for a model like this at least. Now, what's very interesting, and one that I do applaud the builder for, is that they actually have an interior here. But to access the interior, you need to actually disassemble parts of the model, which is very interesting. So the way it works is you very carefully slide this off. Now keep in mind that these dish pieces are held on by a single stud, so it's very easy to accidentally, while you're pulling, just knock one of those off by accident. But what you do is you very carefully, oh, that came off as well. Let's try to get that back on here. Very carefully remove this without things falling off. I mean, things will fall off. And then this entire top part just comes off. It is not attached to anything. It literally just kind of sits there. You can kind of take a sneak peek under the hood to see how this is built. There's a couple of interesting things. At least these are adhered by Technic, so this is pretty stable, I will say. This is not, because it's basically adhered by some rotating hinges and just a couple of studs here, so that is how that whole thing works. But then on the inside, what's very interesting is that now you have this fully kind of tank on its own, that this whole thing opens up once you actually take this off here and reveals an interior. So this was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Or was it welcome? Because you take a lot of bricks, and it does cost more money per bricks to actually build up this interior, which will probably never be seen because you're just going to be so scared of having to take anything off of this model. Still, that being said, very cool how it does have an interior. I like how detailed the seats are, and actually, if you reference the original episodes in the Clone Wars, the viewfinder where the battle droids actually use to actually aim the cannon itself is very, very realistic to the original episode. So I really do applaud the actual inclusion of a full-on interior here. No matter how few times it actually will be accessed, it is still very, very cool that this was included. And to be honest, I can't really think of a way without disassembly that you would have been able to actually put this on. Now, with the top cover disassembled for now, let's kind of demonstrate how this other stuff comes on here. So this piece here, as you can see, is only attached by these 4 studs right here, and these 4 studs are attached to this piece right here. Now this is very, very difficult to put on, and it is deceptively difficult. Oh, pieces are falling off here, so again, super, super fragile, lots of things held on by just one stud. But let's say you want to put this back on. Easy, right? No. So, okay, the way this works is that this entire thing goes into here. However, once this is here, it's really hard to line this up such that it actually is with these studs. I'm really trying to get it lined up, and they're just not hitting the right studs. So the way that you should do it is
there's a couple of things. The way that the instruction manual has you do it is you put this on first and then you put on the base. And I think that's the easiest way to actually put it back on. So if this falls off, which it does fall off a lot of times if you just brush it with your hands because it's only attached by this, you have to do all of this. Let me demonstrate. So you have to take the model, which mind you is a lot harder with all this stuff on, but you have to literally take this entire thing off, which just falls off. I mean, as you can see, this whole front base is just attached by this bar back here. And then you take this, you make sure it actually is stuck onto the model like so, so you actually get that stuck on. That is literally all the connection you have. You kind of rotate it up, but due to gravity, it will keep falling down, and you have to rotate the model itself while holding this up with your fingers, and then somehow attach this on without pushing the plate up too much such that it causes things to break. And this is very hard to put on because, as you can see here, it doesn't really have that many different connection points. Things are already starting to kind of fall apart here, and then you just have to kind of wedge this in and hope for the best, which is what I just did, and it really does rely on gravity literally pushing pieces together to make this work. And as you can see, stuff is already falling apart here. So not the most efficient of builds, I will say. Lots of very finicky stuff that's falling off. It looks like I already lost the front guns here. I don't know where that went. Yeah, so I'll find that somewhere. And then you got to put this whole thing back on. Oh, there it is, underneath the canopy there. So those are just held on by binoculars. Then you take this thing, which feels very dangerous to squeeze inwards. You kind of slide it over the Technic beams here. You get this piece, you line it up, and you manage to fit it inside. It is a very, very complicated process to get this back on. I mean, as you can see, I'm really struggling to align that here. Okay, there's one. We got the other one. We got to put this piece back on. Do it on the do it on the other side here, and you have to be really careful with the places that you hold this because things will just break off. And then there you go. It is all set. So a very complex process of getting things assembled, as you just saw. So obviously not the most stable of builds. However, it makes up... No. Okay. So we got to do all that again because this just broke off on its own. Yep, that is the joy of working with this model. Well, let me talk a little bit about the aesthetics and talk about something good while I fix this again. So the aesthetics, as you can see, are very, very good. This is an incredibly screen-accurate model, and obviously the big trade-off is stability. This thing will just fall apart if you look at it wrong, and this just flops around, but you definitely are sacrificing aesthetics for stability and vice versa. Now, you could not achieve, or I find that it would be very hard to achieve a model that looks this good and has this much level of detail if you were just trying to build it as stable as possible with, say, standard LEGO building techniques. Something has to go somewhere, and in this case, the thing that had to give way was... Oh, no, that broke off again. So, yeah, as you can see, very, very frustrating to actually play around with this thing. No, oh, yep, that whole thing is... And this whole thing has come off now, so, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're going to put this on here, and we're going to hope for the best, and we'll continue on with the review. As I was saying, aesthetically speaking, this is a really great model to play around with, and it pains me to say that this is still one of the most stable models that you can get from Brickvault. I do love Brickvault because the MOCs are really fun, they're really interesting to build, they always use wacky building techniques that I've never experienced before. It gives you a new experience if you are a seasoned LEGO builder looking for something new, and of course, the end product are some of the most detailed and most screen-accurate LEGO models you will ever experience as a LEGO builder. Now that being said, as you can see, you are trading aesthetics for stability here. I probably, if it breaks again, I'm going to have to just end the review and cut off, but I mean, as you can see, very, very fragile, very frustrating to have to keep on doing the same thing over and over again, because these models were not built to be stable. In fact, they were not built to actually stay together whatsoever. They were built for it to be built once, never touched again, and put on a shelf.
Yeah, so that took literally 7 more times to fix. It just kept on popping right off. I'm not going to touch it anymore. I finally fixed it. But yeah, that just kind of demonstrates how, for this model in particular, the aesthetics really are a major trade-off with the stability. Now, as you can see, the shaping is fantastic. You really do capture the look and feel of the model as it appeared in the animation. But shaping is not everything, and to be honest, I feel that it probably could have benefited by having a few less details and being just a little more stable. Or at the very least coming up with a slightly better way to actually attach this piece, rather than it having only be attached by 4 studs and falling off constantly. Now, again, this is kind of the experience you're going to get from many different Brickvault models. They are not bad by any means, and definitely are some of the most technically complex models you are ever going to build in your life. It's just a very different experience, and you kind of have to get used to it. Now, that being said, I am very glad to be owning this model, especially because it's highly unlikely that LEGO will ever make an official set of this model at all in the future. I'm really glad I was able to put it together, and it looks really good next to the MTTs on my shelf, which is absolutely where I will be putting it. Again, I'm just really pleased overall with the overall shaping and aesthetics of this model, and as long as you leave well enough alone and do not mess around with it, do not touch the front, carry it very carefully from the back, you're going to be just fine. And honestly, for a display model like this, that's probably all that really matters. And so, final thoughts on the model itself. Very solid display model, solid from pretty much any angle, even the backside, which arguably is a little bit less interesting. This part actually is quite solid. You can actually really try to pick it up from the back and bottom and carry it around this way. This is really probably going to be your most stable way of carrying it around, and especially as you move over to the front over here, you actually have some good shaping, but again, much more fragile. And that about wraps up this review.
Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at the CIS Supertank. Let me know down in the comments below. If you've built this, what do you think of it? And if not, would you ever consider building it in the future? I had a blast putting it together, and despite some finicky build techniques, this was truly a massive behemoth that I'm so happy to be able to add to my collection. Thank you so much for tuning into Duckbricks, and stay tuned for future reviews of Brickvault models, as well as LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Bye-bye for now.